he would have actually agreed, and I'm not sure that I was doing that on purpose. It was kind of an accident. He was calling, he had a whole discussion on gardening versus farming, urban and rural, and has a lot of, certainly strong opinions on that matter. It doesn't mean you have to agree with it. But he thought of this more as kind of a gardening movement. We can certainly talk about that later, how much of it is a farming movement, essentially, versus gardening movement. Gardening still being sustainable, still being something that will feed the populace, but it was pretty provocative and a bit controversial, so that's something we can also talk about where you move forward in terms of too. But anyway, it is called, and so the names can be interchangeable, but it's semantics, but it's also something we might want to look at later. Community and historic gardening in Germantown, or should we say community and historic farming in Germantown? Ways to look at it. We'll discuss that later. But the description that I had written was Germantown Avenue from Chestnut Hill to North Philadelphia has long been the subject of studies by urban sociologists, landscape architects, and community developers, all of whom have detailed the roadway and region's complex intersection of race, ethnicity, and class. This panel will offer insights into the resurgence of community and historic gardening, either along or adjacent to this route, which has filled the corridor and surrounding neighborhoods with both sustainable agriculture and an aesthetic sense of place. Now, some of this is not a resurgence, even when we get into Gene's work, we're talking about several hundred, I'm sorry, actually, with Gene's work and with Aubrey Arboretum, with Karen's work, we're talking about several hundred years of landscaping management, but even Germantown Historic Trust has been there for several hundred years as well. So we'll see that this is kind of a combination of historic, current trends, and I'm sure all the guests here today will talk about those areas. Just to give you a little background on myself before we get into, I give you some introductions on our guests. I'm an assistant professor of history and policy studies here at Delaware Valley College. I'm a social, cultural, and political historian, American historian. My background is not in landscape, but I'm also a public historian. We just started a public history program here. I am on the board of the Germantown Mennonite Historic Trust. I curated an exhibit there this summer on an anti-slavery movement from the late 17th century that Mennonites and Quakers were involved in. Historic Germantown is an umbrella organization that all three of these participants today are actually under, as well as one of these kinds of loose confederation of historic sites in the region, not just on Germantown Avenue, but off of Germantown Avenue. And my emphasis as a public historian is that I'm continually going to be collaborating with individuals who are doing a number of multifaceted work, not just historic narrative, but preservation, and also landscape management. And certainly that's happening in all of these sites that we're going to talk about today. They're historic sites, but they clearly have this focus on landscape. So that's where we'll see the direction of the talk. So giving you a little bit of a bio on each individual, starting with Jean. She is an MSW. She's been the program director at Historic Fair Hill in North Philadelphia for 11 years. Neighbors, board volunteers, and small staff there have built up a program of greening and school partnerships using a 5-acre green space to bring resources back to a challenged neighborhood. With Karen Flick, she resides in Germantown. She's from Delaware County. She's an assistant landscape manager at Aubrey Arboretum. She has a bachelor's degree in horticulture and psychology from Temple University. She's currently working on a project called Foraging Foodies, which teaches people how to use the landscape around them as food, such as, for example, how to gather ginkgo berries. So all sorts of things. Vita Litvak, our third panelist today, is a Philadelphia-based artist. She was born in 1980 in the former Soviet Union. In 1992, Litvak and her family fled their war-torn home as refugees and settled in the United States. The experiences of her youth were deeply impressive and continue to inform her photographs, video works, and social practice projects. She is deeply moved by the neighborhood where she's currently living, and her recent project in gardening combines her long-held interest in plant cultivation, community, land use, and social empowerment. She graduated from Haverford College in 2002, Departmental High Honors in Fine Arts and Photography, has an MFA in Photography and Film from Virginia Commonwealth in 2008, and currently is teaching photography and art at Moore College of Art and Design at Monmouth University. She also has been a visiting professor at Haverford College and an adjunct professor at Richard Stockton College and Virginia Commonwealth University. So we're going to see a bunch of really interesting presentations by very interesting people. So without further ado, Gina, we'll start.
Thank you. Well, we are delighted to be here at the end of this conference with, just sounds like wonderful people coming and talking about a whole variety of issues about land and the American dream. Well, here we've got a 300-year-old Quaker burial ground in North Philadelphia, the poorest neighborhood in Philadelphia. Median family income, $14,200. So we thought to ourselves, what can we do with this 5-acre beautiful green space in the middle of the neighborhood? It's, for those of you who know a little bit about Philadelphia history, William Penn came to the New World to create a holy experiment where there would be bodies of water and parks and wouldn't have the dreadful crowding and misery that he saw in European cities. So he laid out Philadelphia with green space, and we are about we're about 3 miles north of the center of the city. So when you bought a plot from William Penn, you got 10 acres up in the country in Fair Hill, neighborhood of Fair Hill. And when he died, when he gave this land to George Fox, the founder of Quakerism, who only came to the United States once, but he saw the land, and then when he died, he willed it to Quakers to build a meeting house, a burial ground, gardens for children to grow simples, medicinal herbs. So here we are, more than 300 years later, and a nonprofit board has taken on this land, which had been sold, and it had become the biggest open-air crack cocaine market in the city. Can you imagine? I mean, what a disgrace to these women. This is Lucretia Mott, the great abolitionist and founder of the women's movement, her husband James. And here's Robert Purvis, a young African-American wealthy merchant in Philadelphia who bankrolled the Underground Railroad in Philadelphia. So these people are buried at Fair Hill. And when this became so desolate in the 90s, when this section of North Philadelphia was abandoned, the factories moved out, unemployment was very high, and illegal drugs became the economy of the neighborhood. So it was terrible, and this is what we've seen in many of our northern cities, is when manufacturing jobs leave, terrible blight comes into these cities, and this despair. So in 1993, a neighbor called down to the center of Quakerism, the Friends Center in Philadelphia, and said, "Is this your land? Because it's terrible. Do something about this." So volunteers started to come and clean up. The 5 acres had a high iron fence, and most of that had been stolen. The drug dealers just owned the neighborhood. It was just the land had been finally the Quakers sold it because they just couldn't maintain it anymore. They sold it to another pastor with an endowment. He couldn't keep it because there are 25 drug dealers on the corner, and shots are ringing out every night, and it's a dangerous, despairing place. But a few neighbors got together with a neighborhood leader named Peaches Ramos, and they started to have drug vigils like this, and this Peaches Ramos, we call her our neighborhood hero. She's a Puerto Rican block captain in the neighborhood, and she introduced the police captain to every single neighbor. She went down the street, knocked on the door, and said, "I want you to meet the new police captain. We have to work with him." You know this no snitching sign sometimes you see? People are afraid to call when there's a crime being committed for fear of retribution. Well, Peaches just cut through that. She said, the neighbors have got to work with the police to take back our neighborhood. So that's what happened, and they got organized, and our little organization bought back the burial ground and started to clean it up. So that took years, but finally we cleaned it up. This started about 20 years ago, and I arrived about 10 years ago and was so impressed by this, by the Hispanic block captain as our leader, the African American church people, and the white Quakers getting together with the help of the city and bringing this back. So this is what it looks like today. It's a beautiful green oasis in a city a part of the city that is still struggling with crime and drugs, and but it's made a huge difference. And so in this conference, you've been talking about what land can do, what green space can do. And I want to say that in a city, a part of the city that's this challenged, when you have big trees and gardens and places, safe places where people can gather outdoors, it makes a huge difference. You know, this research about nature deficit disorder, have you heard about that? The Last Child Left in the Woods by Richard Lew, I think his name is Lew, yeah. Talks about research that shows that stress goes down, violence goes down when people can even see a green space like this. So we started to think, what could we do to include the neighbors, work with the neighbors, and use this beautiful green space. So we have a calendar of events throughout the year, cleanups, Martin Luther King Day, we gather with a fire, we read out loud his letters after a cleanup. In April, we start the spring gardening season. The Horticultural Society has a wonderful program called Tree Tenders. Are you familiar with that? Yeah. And the city provides, or PHS supplies free trees to any neighbor who promises to water it for 2 years. So we formed a Tree Tenders chapter now, and spring and fall, we go to the Navy Yard and pick up those bare root trees, and the neighbors who've signed up and pledged to water them, they come out, and we dig the hole and plant that tree, and the neighbors take such good care of their trees. We have a block of 9th Street now that has 18 little trees on it. And they're decorated for Christmas, and they're watered and cared for. It's going to transform that street. It already has, but in 3 or 4 more years, it's going to start to be very obvious. So this goes out. It spreads out, this tree planting. Inside the 5-acre site, with the help of Aubrey, thank you, Aubrey, we keep the grounds looking beautiful, and we have Franklin Institute comes and does an astronomy night, because it's of course a dark spot, 5 acres with no lights. And the kids and the neighbors all come out for that. We do nature field trips, like Aubrey does. We consider ourselves a junior Aubrey. We're a couple miles south of Aubrey. But we have a curriculum for nature field trips, because this is something that most teachers can't do in their schoolrooms. Geared to state science standards. So they come and we help schools do gardens right on their properties. This was a simple, borrowing a car and going over to the recycling center and getting a load of compost, and then the kids unloaded the truck, and the children love real work and working outside. Well, you all know, it's just very. It reweaves the community fabric that has been so damaged in some of our inner city neighborhoods, is gardening together. And of course they grow food. In the summer we have a youth group that works in the gardens, 5 gardens now, right around the neighborhood. When kids come to visit, they climb the trees. This is our youth group with a harvest on a Saturday morning. And then they go and they have a little farm stand on Germantown Avenue. And for last year we tried to sell the produce and nobody would buy it. The kids got discouraged. So this year and then we tried a community CSA, and that didn't work well. We just try different things, right? So what works now is we give the food away with a contribution box to make a donation. And then what doesn't go in the farm stand, the kids distribute through the neighborhood. So they are. We're right opposite a senior center, Warnock Town Senior Housing on Germantown Avenue, and the residents come across the street with their walkers or their electric wheelchairs, and they exclaim over the produce, they talk about recipes, and the children feel so affirmed in their growing of vegetables that their neighbors actually are going to eat them. In the fall, they rake leaves and jump in them. In this neighborhood, there aren't any big trees, there aren't lawns, so this is how kids get to do things they read about in books. This is a 5th grade that came, and there's always, some wonderful nuts or seeds or leaves or flowers, or when you have gardens and big trees, there's so much to discover in the natural world. this was just taken last week. We have one of our gardens is at a transitional housing, it's right around the corner. There's a lot of empty land still in North Philadelphia, so there's an opportunity to build garden beds and if you can get water and start gardens. Let's see if that's the last one. Oh, this is our star lighting in December. We hang a big star over Germantown Avenue that's battery operated, so that light shines until the batteries go, about 3 weeks. This, we bring the fire pit in the winter, and the kids find sticks and toast marshmallows, and at this one we sing Christmas carols. And this neighbor, right here, this father, he said to me last year, he said, you know what, this is what community ought to be. We need to do more of this sort of thing. So it's so it's land. It's just a piece of land, a beautiful 5-acre land in a crowded neighborhood that doesn't have other green spaces. And what we've tried to do is work with our neighbors and community partners like Aubrey, like City Harvest, like Philadelphia Horticultural Society, and make that land a nurturing oasis of peace, a center for community coming together again, and then growing healthy food. I mean, we could talk a whole day on food justice and the fact that most of the stores within a mile of this neighborhood don't sell fresh vegetables. So we're trying to grow fresh vegetables, show the children how to do it, and then encourage people to cook them. So there's many aspects to this, but it's been an experiment of using a green space in a city neighborhood to enhance life and use a historical site to make the future better. So thank you.
Where do you get your mulch?
The recycling center.
Oh, yeah, I forgot to say in the beginning too, it's fine to have question now, but we'll do questions and answers at the end. We'll have a lot of time for that, probably about 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes or so.
Hi, I'm Karen Flick. I'm the Assistant Landscape Manager at Aubrey Arboretum. So I just started there about in the spring. But I've also been volunteering with Aubrey, and I was an intern there for about the past 4 years. So I kind of feel like I've been there for quite a deal of time. So Aubrey has a lot of different aspects to it, but overall it's a historic space of 55 acres in Germantown, which, as Jean said, really doesn't have any green space. It's a very densely populated area. So I'm going to go through and give you a background on it, some of the history, but then when I get into more of what's happening now, I'm going to talk about some of the complications with being a historic site, some challenges I face every day in trying to maintain a historic site, as well as drawing the community, because if you know Aubrey, there's definitely some challenges with a big barrier separating it from the surrounding people. So Aubrey is located in between Ardley Ave and Shoe. There's Washington Lane running right down it, and by a show of hands, has anybody seen it or been there? Yeah, so it's pretty well known as a wall. That's what most people see it as, and I call myself the front line because people always walk down the street and say, what is that place? How do I get in there? Am I allowed in there? Because it's a big stone wall, but inside it has a whole lot going on. So originally the land was used by the native Lenape people, and then it became farmland as the area was becoming colonized and Philadelphia was getting built up. But as Germantown Avenue was really getting populated and spreading out, the Koch family took over the farmland and kind of created it as their own home. They started building their houses on it with their family as their family kept growing, and getting married and having more kids, and eventually they ended up having 20 houses within this 55 acres. So this is the Cope family right here, one of the pictures of many. And so, but by the time it was 1916, Germantown was really growing and pushing out into this farm area. And the Cope family really didn't like that. And they did not want to see their beautiful landscape turned into an urban built landscape. So they donated the area surrounding the homes to the Philadelphia City Parks Association and designated that Albury Arboretum after a place in England. They used the name, and that created the Albury Arboretum Association, who since then has cared for it and made sure that it continues on as open green space, as well as maintaining the historical value of the property. So right here you can see the 20, I think there's actually now 23 homes on the site. The oldest one is number 1 up in the right corner. That's the original farmhouse that the family bought back in 1860. So that was originally built in, I think it was 1793 it was built. So, and then from there, they carried on over all the way to 2 and 3 and started building homes there. So all of the houses you see in the white area they're all historic, but they're private. And then the one house that is public is number 7, right there, the Francis Cope House. So, yeah, so as the area became part parkland, part private, it kind of took on a lot of transformation. The families continued building houses within their areas, but then outside the landscape changed. It not only was just farmland anymore, it was for public use. It was also for recreation then. It wasn't exactly just for going and viewing, it was for people to use in many different ways. So landscape architects were brought over from England to help transform this part farm, part wild area and make it a beautiful vistas that you can see and which still carry on now. As you go up the driveway, there was William Saunders, a landscape architect, who created this. As you go up the driveway and you curve around, you get different views and glimpses of the Francis Cope House. And that's very signature of Albury Arboretum. That's how they wanted the whole landscape to be. So as an arboretum, 55 acres actually isn't that big. So you really have to do a lot with the landscape to really make it something that does take you away from this urban environment and give everybody around it a completely different experience. So also the family took a really big part in gardening the area. Many of the daughters of Francis Cope and Henry Cope kind of took their own little sections and created different children's gardens, and children's playhouses were built. They also had a landscape architect build a pond and the wetland that carries off of one of the still above ground sections of the Winnehaken stream. Correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it's one of the last streams that's above ground in Philadelphia. So it's about a half a city block long. You can go and see it, and then this carries under Washington Lane over into this built stream by the landscape architect. So this is when some of the complications start up. Now that it's no longer just the family's land for them to kind of use and play around with, now it's also part of the community. But this is also where you start to see there's a wall built around it, and how much does the family really want the community coming in, or did they really just do that so that the community didn't penetrate their land and their land's kind of preserved? It's an interesting little play on what happens in history and how we look at it and how it might really kind of the influences. So the red line shows where it's private, and there's a fence that has 3 rails that in most part goes around this whole area. And this fence was built to kind of give the families a view out into this beautiful landscape, but they wanted a very subtle border, so that when people come in, they only get there's not a big barrier, even though it kind of does have that aspect to it. There's not, you can view through this fence and you can see these beautiful mansions and their landscape that's all gardened. And so it's still a flow to it. And the red house right there is the Francis Cope House, and that's open to the public also. So on the left side of Washington Lane, the north side, that is what we call our agricultural village. That encompasses a whole lot of different kinds of agricultural community gardens, farming. It also has weavers and dyers come and grow things, and it has a whole lot going on. But the other side, this side of Washington Lane, is preserved historic area. So including the wetlands that you can now see along the corner running up and down, as well as there's a secret garden up to the top, and this is all now preserved historic site. So in 1916, when it was established, they decided that their mission was to preserve and interpret Albury's historic house and landscape in order to connect the urban community with nature and history, kind of bringing together these 3 things. So in trying to do that, and trying to get the community to go beyond this wall, this big stone wall, and come into this green space, but then you also have, how do they interact with that? And originally, it was just the landscape that you would walk through. You either farmed it or you walked it. Maybe the kids sled it in the winter, but it's kind of well, what do you do with this space? And similar to Fairhill in the 90s and kind of the late 1900s, the area just went completely downhill. The Arboretum also crashed. It was at the verge of pretty much almost being gone completely. They started selling sections of it off. They really didn't know what to do with it. It wasn't safe to go in there. It became very overgrown. Nobody was maintaining it, but the Arboretum board and the employees all band together and just really buckled down and devoted their lives to it. And it's just an amazing group of people that are so dedicated to what they do. They said something has to change. Something has to change for the community and with the community. And how can we make it that this is a site that people can come into and get a rare urban experience in 55 acres of green space, open land to enjoy? And that's where it no longer can maintain just something you pass through and walk through. So they started doing all kinds of things. And that's where the urban farming has come in. There's the community garden where lots of mostly elderly people come and grow their crops and group together. There's all kinds of festivals that we have there. We also bring in camps and school groups to walk around and have educational programs for them to partake in. They're all trying to catch frogs in the pond and such. And right now we have once a week for the entire school year, the Philadelphia School and the Wissahickon Charter School, which is now across the street, are bringing their 5th grade classes. And they're basing their curriculum around wetlands, and they're using the Arboretum's wetland area, which is not in the best shape, and that's kind of perfect that it's not. So they're learning what needs to change to make this ideal habitat. So we also have lots of volunteers continuously coming and learning about how to maintain the grounds, as well as help out with harvest festivals and such, and painting faces. So it's really, we're finding ways now that we can draw the community back in and make them feel like this is their land, this is their open space to use, and how this benefits them, what they can do about it to keep it going, keep it from crashing again in unused open space. So, as I was saying, we're finding ways for adults and children to engage with nature. And not only engage in a structured way, like classrooms sometimes tend to do, and programs, but then by using these to draw people in, it also gives people a connection to the area and kind of draws them in to come on their own and then to find their own way that they want to connect with the open space. So as the assistant landscape manager, I'm the one that's on site all day, every day. I also live there in the mansion, which is very cool. And that mansion right there. So I get to meet all the neighbors. I get to see everybody as they come in. I'm the front line. I'm the first person everyone sees because I'm out there. You know, I'm not going in and upstairs to the offices. So I really get to experience what people experience when they go there. We have kids that just cut through there to go to school. We have the Washington Lane train station where people get off and get right in their car and they're like, what is that? You know, I saw a deer over there. There's a deer in Philadelphia? Like, what in the world? So it's, but then also with the challenge in doing programs like foraging foodies, where we're trying to invite people to come in to literally eat our landscape. So preferably the porcelain berry and the invasives, but we do have other stuff that they may want to eat. And how do we make this balance? And how do I agree, yes, we can plant that, but it's not historic. So kind of how am I going to play around with that and keep it within the historic lines and keep this open landscaped area and parts that were designed by William Saunders, but also make it somewhere people want to go now. It's no longer, 1910, so how can we interact with it? And that is Albury Arboretum. We are continuing to transform in order to preserve. Any questions, or do you want to?
Or we'll do the questions at the
Okay.
end.
So my name is Vita, and I want to sort of introduce the project that I'm working on right now in the context of it. So I live at Germantown Mennonite Historic Trust, and I help maintain and caretake the grounds. The Historic Trust is the site of the first Mennonite meeting house in North America. The Mennonites and Quakers came to Germantown and were the first to settle the area in 1683, so a very long time ago. And our site is the very first place where the Mennonites began to build their meeting house and where the burial grounds, some of the oldest burial grounds for the Mennonite community is. So it's a really special place, and it's very much affected me. So living there has affected me in terms of personally and as well as creatively. Primarily, it is the Mennonite ideal of fighting for social justice. There's a very special object inside the meeting house, which is the table on which the very first protest against slavery was signed by Quakers and Mennonites. And it continues to inspire me. And so the context of the meeting house and our site and where we are now is really important as well. We are right along Germantown Avenue between Pastorius, East Pastorius, and East Herman Street. So we're on the east side of Germantown, which I think is actually, especially in the area of Germantown where we are, kind of significant. From what I understand, there is kind of a divide, an economic and class divide between East and West Germantown, especially in the upper northwest Germantown. And I've become very aware of it just living there, as well as having my artist studio there. So starting last winter, I began to look at the space first by simply walking my dog around the block and thinking about how does this land that surrounds me, both the land I live on, the grounds that I help maintain, The flax that we grow, which the Mennonites grew and made linen with, who was Rittenhouse, who started the first linen mill for paper and fabric. So I love that connection and the ability of plants that grow today to tell a beautiful story and connect to the history of it. But also, how can we transform this mission of social justice that the Mennonites brought with them, and how can we use it today? How can we, as a historic site and caretakers of the historic site, go out into the community and use that mission? So that's kind of where the project began and my thinking of it. And where we are now is I've put together a planning committee from the 6 months of work of organizing the community, and this is a working title for our organization, is Germantown Green Spaces. Repurposing vacant lots for organic gardens and green spaces. Our current project is Precarious Community Gardens, so I'll get to that. But so this is my inspiration. I walk my dog in my neighborhood, and this is what I see. I see a lot of land. A lot of really useless land in a sense that it's just growing weeds. This is a lot right here in Precarious. It is about 6,000 square feet. It belongs to 3 different owners. The weeds are like this tall. It is collecting lots of trash. It's a really quick video of it. And you see there's a telephone pole the city took down and just left there, right? So, and this is where children play and hang out, my neighbors, I know all of them, they're fantastic people. And I'm obviously outraged because I'm a gardener, and a deep part of me just hates weeds, right? And I know some of them are good, and I know these weeds are probably doing a good job on the land, and they are, in a sense, also restoring that land. But this is the lot right across the street from the lot I just showed you, literally right across the street. So I just turn around, there's another lot. It is actually owned by the city of Philadelphia, who does not cut weeds or maintain the land or clean it up. This is another lot on Herman Street, also privately owned. This is a lot on Osceola, which I love. It's very big and it's quite beautiful. And thankfully, its owners at least cut the weeds like twice every summer, so they don't let them get too tall. They just cut it in this picture. So it's owned by Precarious Community Land Trust, who I have been researching but have no idea who they really are. There's not a lot of contact information for them. But right now the land is for sale, which is exciting, and I don't know what it will lead to, but this is another city lot actually on Herman Street. So this is my neighborhood, and as you can see, there are like 28 lots, you know, and the orange ones are owned by the city. The rest are privately owned, but none of them are doing anything. They're literally just collecting weeds. So that really inspired me a lot. Like that's my neighborhood, right? So I walk my dog every week, every day, all around, and meet everybody, say hi. And it matters to me that we live in this neighborhood. So in terms of the relationship of the Mennonite community, in the 50s and 60s, our block actually had a lot of gang activity. It's gotten a lot better, but the Mennonite community eventually ended up buying 2 apartment buildings right next to the church, and has maintained kind of the front of Germantown Avenue, and this is where the Mennonite community is, the meeting house, I mean, and where we all live. Then there's a fence, and then there's this other lot that is right, you know, in my backyard, and the Germantown Mennonite Historic Trust actually bought this lot as well in the 90s to kind of help maintain and get a sense of, you know, this is a lot right next to them, so they wanted to make sure that they had some control over what happens there. But as you can see, not a lot is happening there. Mostly cars just park there. And it's 10 East Pastorius. And so what I decided was to get the community together and propose to Germantown Mennonite Historic Trust, since I have a really strong connection to them, a community garden and orchard project that we could partner with people who live on Pastorius and Herman to begin to transform our neighborhood. And I believe this is our first step. So going back to Germantown green spaces, we're focusing on really, to begin with, Pastorius and Herman, like where we walk. And I think the power of transforming space is local. It's knowing your neighbors, knowing who they are, getting them to come out and meet over dinner and chips, or and starting organizations from the start, because the city's obviously not doing very much, especially with their own lots. But so this is the Mennonite meeting house, and this is the buildings where we live, and we have gardens on the Mennonite grounds that we maintain. So I maintain these gardens this summer. And then there's the fence, right? So this is, I'm sorry, a few other shots of our gardens. And my first step in building this project and thinking about it was to create the very first community bed. And I used my own resources. We got this repurposed wood that was actually on a movie set in Philadelphia, which I thought was great. And we bought it for fairly cheap. And this is my intern who helped me build the bed. It was a big bed that could have a lot of plants. We brought in the dirt and we put in the seedlings. Sort of the usual process of building a garden, except it was just the very first step. And in doing all of that, I met almost everybody on the street. I mean, it was just people walking by, going to the bus, going to the store, and what are you doing over here? And there was so much interest. And I met so many people who were gardeners in the past, who are gardeners now, who have farmed in the past, and were really excited about the idea of actually using space in this way. So this is just some more shots of the bed. It became really just free for the community. And I was out there tending to it and talking to everybody I could see, right? And anybody who stopped by, I was like, come pick my tomatoes, come, this is for everybody, this is for the community. And I wanted to get people engaged and involved. And the first ones to get involved are my neighbors' kids. This is Mazea, they live right down the street. And literally, kids on our block have nowhere to play, nowhere to be, there's not a playground. There's not even a space that doesn't have weeds that is way taller than them. So they gravitate towards the lot and this bed that I built. And I've taught them how to water. They really like the tomatoes. They're like, oh, what kind is this? There's a bunch of heirloom varieties. This is Nazea's brother, Sincere. Watering is like the favorite activity. They're like, no, let me water, it's my turn. We picked the sunflower, and I grew these giant sunflowers. And they love sunflowers because they came by with a store-bought sunflowers and they're eating them. I'm like, let's just roast ours. And I did, and we roasted them together, and then I gave them a bunch, and they're like, these are so much better, these are so good. So getting the kids excited has been a really inspiring to me. I'm like, this is what can come out of building a garden. This is actual. So we also did a free food table at a block party where we got a lot of people. I gave away all of, by the end, all of it was gone, and folks were so excited. And I was doing little tomato demonstrations, you want a piece, you want to try it? And it is really effective in terms of getting steam and organizing community, which I think is the real key in getting anything done in terms of transforming how our spaces look and how they're used, how this land around us is used. So in August, we had our first planning committee meeting. This is my studio. So my studio literally looks out onto 10 East Pastorius lot. So I see this lot from my bedroom window, from my studio window. It is this space that is also just very much part of my life. And being an artist, I create with what's around me. So I think, in a sense, this is very much a gardening project, an artist project, and a community project. So I've gotten together neighbors, Germantown, community members, neighbors from Precarious and Herman Street. I went and sort of knocked on doors and just had people sign a petition and talk to them about the idea of having the garden, and also moving out into the block, starting on Precarious, and transforming the lot in Germantown Mennonite Historic Trust partnership, but also beginning to think about how do we utilize the 10, 15 lots just in our surrounding block, and making sure that it doesn't just stop here on the Mennonite grounds, but with the help of the Mennonite community and the Historic Trust, that we can continue to revitalize our couple of blocks and move forward, and really try to change what's going on. So we, in a sense, are very new. I'm just gonna skip some of the, for time's sake, some of the things that we've been talking about in the planning committee. Our mission is in a sense obvious. It's to increase access to locally grown affordable nutrition, provide educational opportunities in organic vegetable and fruit production, and create green spaces where a neighborhood may come together to share their stories, recipes, and seeds. I think the notion of bringing people together in a place where that can happen is a really important one. And community gardens in Germantown, there are actually quite a few. But what I like is the idea that you can walk to your garden, that you don't have to drive to your garden, that the engagement increases when the proximity is so close, and that it's a way for this community in a gentrifying neighborhood to also have a say in what happens to this land, right? So the large Osceola lot that's for sale right now, I actually had conversations with several people I knew who were asking me, well, what's the neighborhood like? The lot is so great, it's so cheap, I want to buy it and develop it, right? And that was like the last thing that I, in a sense, want. I'm like, no, you really don't want to develop it. Why don't you buy it and let me rent it from you, and we'll start like a farm or a community garden, because that's the way to really rehabilitate the neighborhood, or the 2 blocks that we're in. It's interesting, in my sense, Germantown is really diverse, and there's certain types of pockets. And the pocket where we're in really needs a lot of help in terms of opportunities, access to organic nutrition, cleaning up lots. I mean, that's the first step. So that's my hope, is that part of this can be really sort of pushed forward into the larger neighborhood that surrounds the Precarious lot. So far, this is the designs that we have. We've been talking to Philadelphia Orchards Project, which is a fantastic organization in Philadelphia that helps set up organic orchards all across Philly. They have about 50 that they help plant and maintain today. And they came out and looked at our site and were really excited about it. And our plan is to have community members on Precarious Avenue and Herman Street, if they're really interested in having a tree, to sign up for it like you would for a community bed. So a yearly contract, you say that this is my tree, I'm going to plant it, I'm going to maintain it, I'm going to learn how to prune it, I'm going to harvest it, right? So sort of take responsibility for the tree, and the same way that you would for a community garden bed. So this is kind of the lot that you saw in the beginning. The first portion of it will probably have several trees of different variety, and we're having a community town hall meeting that we're calling to really get an idea of the type of trees people want to plant and their ideas, right? So our neighborhood and what they want to see on the lot. So these two beds, and I haven't talked about that yet, but in my proposal of the project to Germantown Mennonite Historic Trust, part of the proposal that's really important to me too is to create 2 exhibition beds that have historical heirloom plants. So there's a lot of research being done on heirloom plant varieties, and the varieties that we want to look at are ones that have been grown by the Mennonites who first arrived in Germantown. And we want to grow those varieties and help to save the seeds and continue the propagation of those plants. In a sense, bringing the historical portion of this to life. And we also want to grow Lenape heirloom varieties because, of course, the Mennonites were not obviously the first ones who arrived in Germantown. There were people who lived there before. To tell the story and continue the history presentation of the site through plants, through vegetables, through flowers, something that you can connect to viscerally, not just cerebrally. So that's the story of Pastorius Gardens.
So I'm sure you have a number of questions for the panelists. They are